which were both, I mean, they were much bigger venues, so you could get like a couple hundred people in those. So like big bands would come through there, and you could see them. But I was like a little kid, so I didn't travel much.
Okay, yeah, I guess that makes sense. It's we were just fortunate enough. We grew up pretty close to Asbury Park, home of which where Bruce Springsteen got his start at the Stone Pony. So there's always, you name it, and pretty close to New York City, relatively about an hour outside of New York. So we got to experience a lot of that. We didn't really have to travel, but
yeah, it was kind of weird. And Durham at the time was kind of this like post-tobacco industry wasteland. All those places have become like totally transformed because Research Triangle Park and all these people are moving from the Northeast and stuff, and so it's a totally different world. But when I was growing up, Durham was really this like trashed kind of inner city landscape with all these old tobacco warehouses that were like dilapidated, and a lot of like, it was weird being a punk kid because you'd get like a bunch of crap from like the rednecks, and then you'd get a bunch of crap from like the inner city black kids, and it was just kind of, you were constantly in this kind of weird violent atmosphere. I don't know, it was interesting.
Who's your favorite punk rock band?
That's tough.
If you had to pick one.
I do like
Deserted Island.
I like the band Fear.
Yeah,
because they're so incredibly offensive, and I also appreciate like the weird kind of discorded nature of their music. Let's see, and also I like a lot of like old oi stuff, and then some ska stuff kind of filters. And it's like the older you get, the more you kind of moved into like, oi, like, and ska, and like bands like the Foreskins or the Business and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But in the heyday of all that stuff, we were listening to like Agnostic Front and the Exploited and like the Circle Jerk, all that kind of classic like hardcore stuff.
Nice.
It's only as I became more sophisticated that it changed. But
right on.
So, how do you go from punk rock, Spike Mohawk to Tank Commander?
Yeah, was that court ordered?
That's a good question. Well, it's weird because so many of the punk rock kids that I grew up with ended up serving in the military in one capacity or another. And so I think if you really kind of dig deep, one, there's this violent kind of undertone to the punk rock scene, especially like in the 80s. And it was also filled with like a lot of kids that wanted to sort of felt like outsiders and wanted to belong to something. And so in a way, and a lot of kind of like working class kids from broken homes. And so in a way, I think that wasn't that far of a stretch for people to go into the military. I mean, so many, two trends that I've noticed in people's lives that I grew up with that were big in the punk scene. A lot of them went in the military at some point, and a lot of them are like some form of like libertarian. And so, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know how that transition happened, but it seemed to be a common pathway for a lot of different people,
And how long was your time in the Army, correct?
Yeah, so I was in the Guard and Reserves for 7 years.
Okay.
I got out like a year before the invasion of Iraq. And they sent my unit a lot of, I served with a lot of guys that were, I was in an armored cavalry unit. So first I was a tank platoon leader in a regular like armored unit, which was just, the way they would form those is like, they would make company teams out of mechanized infantry and armor. So maybe one tank platoon and two mech infantry platoons. But then I became a scout platoon leader, and that was like a brigade level reconnaissance element. So it was still Bradleys and tanks, but they just had a different mission. So you would do reconnaissance for like a one-star general that commanded this brigade. So they sent that whole brigade to Iraq after I got out.
In 91?
No, this was like 2002 or
okay.
whatever. Yeah, because I guess I was like 22. It's all a blur, but I was like 22 when I went in,
okay,
or 21, and then I was like 29 when I got out. But so, and a lot of those guys were from these like really tiny. Like the weird thing about all that was, I don't know how much you guys remember about like the War on Terror and everything, but one of the ways that they kind of avoided having a draft is they just activated all the Guard and Reserve units and sent them over there. And so a lot of these guys were from these like small, like impoverished southern towns. So like, some huge percentage of the people from like whatever, Elizabethtown, North Carolina, or Bladenboro would be in the guard unit because it was you could get an extra paycheck. Plus, they wanted to serve in the military and stuff. But then when they activated these units, they sent them over to combat for a year, and I keep up with some of those guys, and obviously it was a trying experience. They got there like right when the big insurgency was kicking off and stuff, so it was a lot of nasty stuff that went on for them. Yeah. So
and you had done some schooling, then went in?
Mm-hmm, so I had like 2 years. It's an interesting story. I had, I think, 2 years of college, and I enlisted in the reserves, and I can't, it's like you go to the MEPS military entrance processing site, and it's like, here's the jobs that you qualify for. And so it was like medical supply specialist and like some other stuff. So I took the medical supply specialist job, and I remember like it came with like a $10,000 signing bonus, and I was like in basic training at Fort Jackson, South Carolina, and the drill sergeants were like, "You guys are RIMFs," and I was like, "What's a RIMF?" And they were like, "It means rear echelon motherfucker." And I was like, oh, so ashamed and upset. And I was like, "Oh, my rear echelon motherfucker, this is terrible." And I was like, "No, I'm going to be in like in a MASH unit." They're like, "You're going to be in a giant air-conditioned tent, whatever, handing out Band-Aids." And so I was like, what do I do? Like, I don't want to be a rear echelon motherfucker. So I had college, and I was still in college. So I went into the Green to Gold program. So basically they were like, you can go in this Green to Gold program, do like 2 years every day while you get your degree. It's like the RTC programs here. And when you come out, you'll get a commission, and then you can branch like a combat arms and no longer be a rear echelon motherfucker. So that's what I did. And,
right.
And then like, I don't know, in hindsight, I think a lot differently about all that, but that's what I did.
And through the process of all that, being a punk rocker, doing the guard and all that stuff, had you been interested in film and stuff like that, or is that something that completely came after both of those things?
Yeah, so my undergraduate degree is in history and classical civilization, which made a lot of sense like for an Army officer. But I wanted to be a writer, and I was always really interested in history. And a good friend of mine that I grew up with, this guy Seth Grossman, was like, no, we should just be filmmakers because it's like the modern day version of being a writer. It'll be awesome. It'll just be rich and famous. And I was like, oh, that sounds great. Let's do that. Of course, it's a hell of a lot harder than people imagine. And so, my films are really influenced by, I think, that love of writing, but also this connection to history. So the first film that I ever made was like a PBS film about a Civil War battle, and and if you look at kind of the trajectory of my films, all these kind of key things come up again and again and again that are kind of connected to all that stuff.
Is that your favorite period of history? Civil War?
No,
era?
I'm interested in all of it, from back in like ancient classical civilization all the way through contemporary times. But to me, I do feel like it's important to have a grounded connection to what came before you in order to understand kind of what's happening in contemporary society. That was, for whatever reason, I was drawn to that.
Yeah, I spent some time as a high school history teacher.
Okay.
So I've always kind of had a interest in history, different periods and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I was curious, what are your thoughts on the pyramids?
God, maybe one of the like my least understood periods of history would be Egypt. I can't even I guess there's people whose whole job is just to be Egyptologist, right?
Yeah.
But I don't know. What are your thoughts? Do you have thoughts on them?
I mean, I have a mind that is open to everything and attached to nothing.
Maybe it's aliens.
Yeah.
Maybe,
I know I couldn't make them.
Ancient astronauts.
Yeah, that's what I was saying.
But, I mean, to think that the way they are designed, that in 2019 we would still have a difficult time to construct something like that with the technologies that we have. It is kind of hard to wrap my head around as a 43-year-old the narrative that is taught in U.S. or I'm sorry, not in world history in freshman year in high school.
Yeah, no, that's true about a lot of stuff. I made this film called Reconvergence, and there's about several different characters, but one of them is this guy named Hughes Conway, and he basically he was the subject of this book called The Last American Man, by the woman that wrote Eat, Pray, Love. Do you remember that book? I never read it, but it was like a bestseller.
I'm gonna write that down.
But Hustis basically rejects contemporary society and lives like it's the 1800s up in the Appalachian Mountains. And right when we finished that film, he he got on that show Mountain Men, which was kind of weirdly disappointing to me. I was like, Eustace, really? But, so it was really interesting doing that film with him because he was just talking about our disconnection from the kind of most basic of things. So like, as I was interviewing, I was like, yeah, like how is bread made? And then I was like, I don't even know what flour is actually. And he was like, and so he was told me this story about like, he has these interns that come up there and they live, functionally like it's the 1800s and like build these, cabins that are like pioneers would have built and stuff. And he was like, I told her to move these barrels up this hill. And he was like, I looked over and she was like rolling the barrels like end over end, like not taking advantage. Like he was like, she didn't even know how to make a round thing roll. And so, when I think about stuff like the pyramids or incredibly, strong swords made with technology that's like supposed to be rudimentary, I guess I wonder how completely disconnected from all that we are now. So like you, I think anything's possible. Is it aliens or did people just know how to do stuff with the resources at hand in a totally different way? I don't know.
Right.
But either way, it's pretty interesting.
Are you interested in Graham Hancock stuff at all?
No, I don't know. I don't know anything about that.
Yeah, he was just a journalist, and then back in the early 90s, I think it was, maybe the late 80s, he was in Ethiopia, and he came across these Ethiopian Orthodox priests, and they were blind, and they were guarding this temple, and they claimed that the Ark of the Covenant was in this temple. So that kind of led him down this road, and so now he's done a lot of research, be it scuba diving in ruins and just the pyramids and different things, and his thought is that we are a civilization with amnesia, and that there was some far more advanced civilization that was wiped out by the Ice Age or like a comet that that led to the causing of the Ice Age. And so he gets a lot of pushback from Egyptologists that are like, nope, this is the narrative, because now they're saying that the erosion on the Sphinx is actually rain erosion. And so then if you go back, or if you go into that theory that it's rain erosion, then you have to redate the entire thing because it's so much further back to when that area was like a rainforest. Yeah,
that's crazy. I mean, regardless of how inaccurate historical narratives are, even if they're just generally conventional, they're still inaccurate for someone. I did an interview with the guy that was the head of the Museum of the Confederacy in Richmond, Virginia.
What was that like?
It was really interesting. They preserve the relics associated with the Confederacy. Basically, they had all this crazy stuff. I mean, they took me like into the back room, into the vault or whatever, and they had like Robert E. Lee's saddle and like Jeb Stuart's plumed hat, like all this crazy stuff. But it was really interesting listening to him talk, because we were talking about Osama bin Laden, and he was like, things can be two things in history, but they can only be one thing in memory. And I thought that was really profound. He was like, Osama bin Laden, is he an enlightened freedom fighter, or is he a bloodthirsty terrorist? He's both.
Or is he a government shill?
Yeah, right. He can be all three of those things, and so I look at a lot of what's happening in the society that we live in now, and I think about that. I think about how, people put forward these historical narratives that become the dominant narrative, but they often leave out a host of different viewpoints and things. There's this duality to everything, and so these events and the meaning and symbols of them can be multifaceted. They can be many things at once, and that's the real trick of history, I think.
Yeah, and not to. I think with social justice warriors, and we've got to get these statues out of here and remove. For better or worse, it's part of history. It happened, and
right.
We're not like championing it, or celebrating it. And maybe some people do celebrate it, but it was something that happened. It changed the course of the United States. And
right. Yeah, I was just talking about this the other day, because where I'm from in Chapel Hill, they removed Silent Sam, which was obviously like a monument that was put up in probably the 20s or something by like the Daughters of the Revolution. and it was about, the Confederate war dead, but it's also an inflammatory symbol to a lot of people for obvious reasons. And so that's a perfect example of things being two things in history, but one thing in memory. I mean, because so many of these things that people discuss now are philosophical in nature. It's not like math or science. You can never get to the bottom of it. And so it seems like the only hope is to kind of like bridge these different narratives in a way that allows people to have some form of empathy for these divergent viewpoints. I certainly don't claim to know what the answer is, but I think it's an interesting thing to think about, that truth kind of is subjective when it comes to history and memory and the meaning of things.
Sure.
So you were talking about certain things symbolizing certain things, and there being two histories but one memory. Do you use concepts like that in your writing?
Well, I think it's important when we're creating characters to think about the fact that what the engine of screenplays basically is conflict, and so in order to have conflict, we have to have people with divergent goals, and people who maybe believe completely different things. So, and we also have to have characters. If we want characters that are complex and interesting, we have to have characters that might have a duality to themselves, like we all do. I mean, how many of us say we're going to do one thing and do the opposite, or constantly diverge between two different forms of behavior?
Two voices.
Yeah, right. And that's the double-faced mask or whatever. Is that the heart of what it means to be human? So yeah, I think that's what makes art and storytelling work, is the fact that we're in conflict with each other, we're in conflict with ourselves, and the richest stories are things that exploit all those forms of different conflict and maybe allow us to have insight into people's perspectives that we wouldn't normally have. I think that's what great art does, hopefully.
Yeah. Sometimes we're more in conflict with ourselves than we are with others.
Yeah, that's
inner conflict causes outer conflict.
Right. No, I'm with you there for sure. And
traumas and triggers.
Right. So yeah.
I saw you just recently did a short with Cheech.
Yeah. Oh yeah. That's been.
What's
amazing.
that like?
That was awesome. Cheech Marion is he's an incredible person. He's really down to earth. He's like kind. I feel like I don't know what I expected. I guess I expected, because he was so famous, I didn't know how he would be. But he's really an interesting guy who genuinely and deeply cares about. The film is about his Chicano art collection, and they're making this big museum in Riverside, California for it. And that's one of the great legacies of his life, I think, is amassing this collection and trying to educate people on the value of Chicano art as a school of art. And he was just been a great person to work with. It's been really cool. And the score was done by this Grammy-nominated artist, El Dusty, who's from South Texas, and that's also been really, really cool. So we're supposed to have a screening here in April that Cheech will be present at. This is the first time we've told anyone. And El Dusty will be performing live after the screening and the discussion with Cheech. So, yeah.
Airey Bros Radio exclusive.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I'm supposed to.
It's all right.
I guess it's okay.
It's going to be a minute before this comes out. But how'd you guys link up? Did he reach out to you, or did someone connect you?
So I had run like a screening series in South Texas for 10 years called South Texas Cinematheque, and the purpose of it was to bring internationally recognized filmmakers in so that our students could have access to them, because South Texas is to some degree an isolated place, and there's not a lot of filmmakers coming through Corpus Christi that are, winning Sundance or something. So that was our purpose for the screening series, and we ended up doing it always at the Art Museum of South Texas. It was a great venue. They had a theater there. It was beautiful, and so they had a relationship with Cheech, and Cheech was doing this exhibit there of part of his collection called Los Tejanos. And they were like, we want someone just to film some of this stuff. And I was like, I'll do a whole short about it. And that's kind of how it happened.
Right. And what is Chicano art for those people that don't know?
So, yeah, that's kind of a loaded question,
Is it
I
like
guess.
Sugar Skull type stuff? Or
No,
is it way more in depth than that?
It's a million different kinds of things, I mean, I think the simplest answer is that, it's Hispanic artists that share in common certain, life experiences in the United States, and they make a really, really diverse group of art. I mean, it's not one painter is not always like or in any way like the other, but they have kind of similar life experiences or cultural experiences just based on their connection to Tejano or Chicano culture. Yeah. But you know what? That's a great question for Cheech during the Q&A.
Oh, maybe we can get Cheech on Airey Bros.
So, working with Cheech, who's someone I think everyone listening to this podcast knows, who have been some other...
Wait. Before we get away from Cheech,
okay.
Did you burn one with him? Can I ask that?
Instead of answering it,
we can cut it out.
I'm gonna if I blink twice for yes and once for no.
Go ahead.
So, who else have you worked with who has notoriety in the public sphere, who's impacted you, or was just someone that you looked up to and you met him and like, wow, that's a cool dude?
So I did a film with this guy named Richard Beamer and did a short film called Sadie's Waltz, which is, I think, maybe one of the least great films that I ever made, but it was one of the best experiences for me as a filmmaker. Richard Beamer was the lead in the movie West Side Story. Did you ever see West Side Story? And he's also in both Twin Peaks. He played Ben Horn in Twin Peaks. He's been in a million different things. And he really kind of... he really put me through hell as a director, but for good reasons, I think. He is like a method actor, and I was really nervous making that film, especially like directing someone who had been in so many things. And so I wanted to have like a really solid plan. So I had like all these storyboards made, and I knew exactly where the camera was going to go and how we were going to shoot everything. And as soon as he got wind of that, he was like, he refused to cooperate with any of the pre-visualization. And he was like, nope, like this camera is here to capture what we decide to do. And you as the director and us as the actors are going to block this out, and we're going to figure it out. And then you're going to have to plan the coverage on the fly based on what we figure out. And I was like, no, I hate you, Richard. I was so upset. But then by the end of it, it really changed how I approached everything, because I think that's true. It's like, some filmmakers have the luxury of being able to do, use actors exactly how they want. They can pre-plan everything. But the rest of us, have a relationship with actors that has to give, how should I say this? That needs to respect what they bring to the table as collaborators. And that's what Richard taught me, was that, a director works with the actors on set to figure out the scene, and then we decide how we're going to shoot it based on that collaboration. So that was huge for me.
How does that work when you get a little bit of that butting heads, and maybe you can't come to a common ground or figure it out? Who intervenes, and then ultimately does the actor get what he wants?
Well, I think it's interesting because I think the power dynamic shifts depending on which stage of the process, of the production process that you're in, and how much money you have. So, as a independent filmmaker that works in academia, my budgets are like tiny. So I can't pay Richard Beamer a ton of money to be in my movie, in which he's going to be like terrified if I fire him or something. I have to, convince him to be in it because he likes the script or whatever. And so, it's the great secret is like, if you're in that situation, as soon as you start shooting, it's like all the power shifts to the actors, because what are you going to do if they walk off your film after the third day? Your film is destroyed. So, it was interesting. Like, my goal was to finish the film successfully, and Richard's goal was to kind of force me to operate in a way that he thought was the right way to operate. And I think he was right in terms of the relationship between the director and the actors. But as soon as we shot his last scene, he was like, now you can, I guess he sensed that I was frustrated. He was like, now you can tell me what you really think. I was like, Richard, like, it doesn't matter anymore because we shot it. I'm just trying to survive the film. But in retrospect, it was great. I mean, I just think there's tons of times where people when you're making a film, it's high stress. You're trying to create something complicated with complicated equipment in a limited amount of time, usually under volatile circumstances. And the less money you have, the worse that is. you know, and usually the less money you have, the more impassioned people are to succeed. So I think people have to figure it out, but there's many films that just fail because they can't. That's why, you know, one reason maybe people have production insurance is like if you have volatile actors and impassioned directors, sometimes they can't figure out how to get through it. I've never had that happen where you just could never get through it, but I've certainly been really pissed a lot of times.
And where does the funding come from? Or are you doing like Kickstarters, or are you knocking down doors?
I don't do the Kickstarter thing just because I feel like it's like a world of, it's like incestuous in the sense that like I give to your Kickstarter and then you just have to give it back to my Kickstarter. So I was fortunate enough to work with a producer on a lot of stuff that, you know, we're good friends now, but that brought funding to the table. And usually my, you know, the funding for my films, even the feature films, it's really small, you know, so I'm just able to get it. And that's one reason why I work a lot in documentaries, because they're so cheap to make, but you can make really amazing films, you know, unlike in the fictional narrative world where that, you know, that the lack of money can be like a tremendous detriment to you.
How are we on time right now?
Oh, we're good. Let's keep going.
All right. So you mentioned documentaries, and first day of class you were kind of going over who you are and what you're about, and you had mentioned you did an ayahuasca documentary. You also mentioned you were a tank commander. All the younger kids in class, all they heard was tank commander. I heard punk rock and ayahuasca. I was like, that's my guy. And they're like, oh, he's a military guy. He's a hard ass. I'm like, I don't
clearly
know.
not. I'm clearly not a hard ass in there.
No, not at all. So that said, what was that documentary like, that ayahuasca ceremony that you did in Peru?
It was weird, to say the least. I mean,
where in Peru did you go?
Iquitos.
Yeah. I've been there.
Oh, really? Yeah. So, you know, like you have to fly in, and
Yep.
there's just like little mopeds everywhere.
Yeah.
So that was the same Reconvergence film with the Hughes Conway naturalist guy. There's like 4 characters in that, and one is this poet who, you know, does ayahuasca and believes that ayahuasca allows his spirit to travel out of his body and then travel back into his body. And so, you know, it was interesting because I thought, so we went down there, and then the ceremony was like way out in the jungle, and he had like this shaman. There's like these little shacks that they built out there.
Well, was it a specific place, or was it with one shaman?
Yeah, and I don't know what the shaman's name was. I mean, he was there so basically it's like they did this ceremony for us to be able to film it, you know.
Oh, okay.
So they had, you know, he had lived down. This guy had lived down there for a long time, and travel back and forth to the United States. Now he's back in the United States, and he's married to a woman from Peru. But so they brought in this shaman, and they had this place where people go do these ceremonies out in the jungle, basically. And so we had to, like, you know, get this dude to row us across this little tributary of the Amazon, and like, you know, it was dark and terrifying. And then they did, you know, the ayahuasca, and they all like purged everywhere. And then, you know, I didn't know what to expect. I thought it was going to be like crazy, but of course, if you've ever done it, it's like the people that you're witnessing do it are just sort of like sitting there.
So you were just observing
Yeah,
them?
I didn't do it.
You didn't do it?
No,
Okay.
because we were like making the film.
Yeah, all right, wow.
So, yeah, I think that film Reconvergence, I think you can watch the first 10 minutes of it for free online, and then it's like available on whatever different streaming services and stuff now. But it's really interesting. The whole climax of the film is like bringing together these 4 characters in this really interesting and strange way. The Museum of the Confederacy guys also from that. And then there was like a Harvard neuroscientist who believes that, you know, constantly recording his life will allow these supercomputers to like reconstruct his consciousness and make him immortal, basically. You know, it's a really weird film, but it's like my favorite film I've ever made, I think.
Really?
Yeah.
And that's Reconvergence?
Yeah. So you can watch the first 10 minutes, and then
It's on Netflix?
I think it's on like
Or Hulu?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm not sure. Just look it up. You might have to. It might be through like a pay service, because the company that bought it is like Gaia. I guess they've changed their name.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. So they have the Seeking Truth series,
Yep.
and they bought it. I was really shocked when they bought it. I was like, "Is this what? Am I making these kind of films?" But apparently, I did.
Very cool. Yeah, I've done 10 ceremonies.
Okay. Wow.
I did 7 in Peru, and then I've done 3 here in Colorado.
Yeah, I think it seems too extreme for my taste.
Okay.
You know, but I'm too like I'm not confident enough in my own subconscious to want to go through that. I don't think.
I don't blame you. It's a trip for sure. We'll take you places. Was that movie in any film festivals or anything?
Yeah, I was in a bunch, and so it was part of like IFP, which is the so IFP in New York, the Independent Film Project. They chose like 60 films internationally that were like still in the process of being made to be part of Independent Film Week in New York. So we went up to New York and we got to meet with a bunch of distributors and stuff. And then after that, it played at, film festivals internationally, I guess, mostly in the United States, but a few outside of the United States. And then it got picked up by, the distributor after that. So, but it's like my favorite movie. It was a really weird and cool film to work on. And I worked with the guy that shot it is this guy, David Lowery, and he, right after that, his career kind of took off. So he directed like Pete's Dragon and like all these other he's like a Hollywood director now, and like a super, super nice guy from Dallas.
Okay.
Yeah.
How long were you in Peru for?
Maybe like 7 days or something.
All in Iquitos, or did you go in Lima a little bit too?
No, just all in Iquitos, yeah. Because we were filming like all kinds of stuff associated with the film, just there, basically.
What'd you think of Iquitos?
I don't know. Man, it was, after like day 3, I was like, ugh.
Yeah.
You've been there. It's kind of like the market. We went and filmed like the market with all the like dead and dying
the floating
animals.
Market?
No, it was on a street, but it was like people just like killing animals right there, and it was weird, for sure.
Yeah, it's the largest city in the world not accessible by roads.
Right.
So you either have to boat in or fly in.
Yeah, and like the hotel we stayed in had all these people that were like clearly like drug tourists and stuff.
Medicine.
Yeah, right. Medicine. And they were like freaky. So, it was like the
Bohemians.
The walls only extended up like 10 feet, and then they were like screened. So you could kind of hear everything from all the other rooms. And at night there'd be like people like wailing and like freaking out and stuff. And I got really sick, like with some kind of whatever, like
Montezuma's
parasite or
revenge.
something. It was horrible. And I was so paranoid and like delusional that I was like, they're gonna steal someone's gonna come steal our equipment. And like when I was talking to my wife on the phone, I was like, they're listening. And so I decided like if I just talk with this crazy Southern accent, no one would be able to decipher it, but I was just like delusional in the jungle with some kind of horrible, whatever waterborne illness. Yeah. But it didn't make it any better that people were like laughing maniacally and like, having all these weird bad trips that were like kind of funneling through the screens at the top of all the rooms. It was definitely strange.
Yeah, it's an interesting place. And leading into that trip to Peru was my first experiences. I spent a lot of time watching documentaries and listening to podcasts. And as soon as we touched down in Iquitos, I thought, oh shit, I didn't spend any time brushing up on my Spanish.
Yeah, that's not a good thing. Well, luckily the guy that we were with spoke Spanish, but yeah, and then that like weird little prop plane you have to take from like over the Andes. I don't know if you were in the same boat with that, but it was just like a little propeller plane. I was like, you've already been traveling forever. You're like wiped out, and it was weird. But it was really cool. Glad I did it.
Yeah, I would like to go back to Peru or South America in general.
Yeah.
Tribeca Film Festival. Have you met Bobby D?
No. Nope. No. He doesn't make the rounds as much as you might think, but that was an amazing film festival. I mean, it was like, it's on the scale of like South by Southwest or Sundance or one of those giant film festivals that has so many resources. A lot of times you go to film festivals and you go to like the Filmmakers Lounge and it's like whatever, some kind of sad hors d'oeuvres and like bottled water, but at Tribeca it was like the Visa Lounge, and it's like people with gourmet hors d'oeuvres everywhere and like free, everything was just like kind of above and beyond anything I had been to at that point with the film festival. It was pretty cool.
Really?
Is that your favorite experience at a film festival?
No, I kind of it was kind of overwhelming, and so I think there's a lot of festivals that are smaller film festivals that are still great and really well attended, where you have kind of more an intimate experience and you get to meet and hang out with filmmakers more. And there's a bunch of those on that kind of tier right under Tribeca, like the Sidewalk Film Festival, or like the Bend Film Festival in Oregon, or like Indie Memphis. There's a ton that I could rattle off that I think are a different experience that I might just like prefer at this point.
And Cannes and Sundance, are those like the creme de la creme, or there are other ones
Yeah.
up there?
I mean, there's a bunch of really big ones. I mean, I think Sundance, you're going to get a bunch of different opinions depending on who you ask. I've never been to Sundance. They've never let my stuff in. So, I can't speak from personal experience, but I do think it's a lot closer to like the industry in Hollywood than some other film festivals. So the question always is, how independent are the independent films getting in? And if you have tons of A-list actors and multi-million-dollar budgets, it's a lot different than something like, say, the Austin Revolution Film Festival in Austin that really is programming these very tiny, budgeted, small, super independent films. And I think all of them have their purpose. At the end of the day, filmmakers want their films to reach audiences and hopefully be able to see them with live audiences and stuff. And Sundance is just a different animal than some of those other things, but certainly something that's really important to the film world,
And are you submitting films to these film festivals, or do some film festivals come looking for you?
Yeah, so now, it works both ways. I mean, normally when we have a film come out, we'll submit like a batch of them. And we kind of have, at this point, like relationships with film festivals that you play at again and again. And so that doesn't guarantee that you'll get into them, obviously, but at least they kind of know your work and stuff. And then if, a lot of programmers will go to film festivals, like bigger film festivals, and then they'll reach out to people whose work they saw there that they want to program for their own festivals. So that kind of happens that way too.
Cool.
Yeah.
So what does the process, for someone who doesn't know, what does that process look like from writing the script to pitching it to finding a producer to getting everything on film to editing to getting into a film festival? What does that process look like? How in depth can you go with that process?
I mean, you encapsulate it pretty well in terms of like the big bullet points of it, but I think it just depends on the scope of the film that you're making. So, I mean, I think, one thing that's true is that if you're making a fictional film and you want to make money off it, your chances are exponentially increased if you have recognizable talent in it. So that changes your budget completely. And so that's a whole different set of steps, I think, because then the more money you spend on a film, the more crucial distribution becomes and the profitability of the film becomes. But if you operate in a much lower kind of price point, then you can make film. Like, no, I don't believe anyone would have let me make Reconvergence. Like, if I went to a distributor and was like, I'm going to make this film, and because it sounded so crazy. And no one, and it seemed likely that we wouldn't be able to kind of pull off the underlying idea behind it. In fact, we didn't even really know what the idea was. We were just kind of following this thread. We started with the ayahuasca guy, and then he mentioned all these themes, and we started seeking out sort of similar characters, and then one after another after another. And so my point is just that because the budget was so small on that, it's like we were able to find people that would fund it who didn't care if it was financially, successful or not. And the kind of films that I like to make are normally, films that I like to make them on my own terms and stuff. So I have to make them in a way that I'm not beholden for that like big payoff ultimately, because I like the process, and I love writing. I love writing fictional stuff. There's no barriers to that. I mean, if you write a bad script, it's not like you just throw it in the trash can and start again. And I like documentary for the same reason. And it allows me to like explore all these different worlds. And that's why I'm a filmmaker, because I love the process of making the films. But, there's a lot of people that make films because like they want to be rich and famous. Like I wanted to be when I was like 22 when I first thought about it. After the journey, it's a little bit different. But
how did you come and connect with the ayahuasca guy?
I grew up with him. I was in high school with him, so I knew him, and we like hadn't seen each other in years and years. And he was like, well, "Let's go camping, like in the Appalachians." So we went camping, and he started telling me about all this, and I was like, "Oh my God, like you have lost your mind!" Like I didn't believe it at all, And then I was like, "This is really interesting and strange." So, like I was like, "Let's just shoot an interview about it and see where it goes." And the interview was really interesting, and it was just really compelling. And so we were like, there's probably a film here. And then we started. There's this film that I love called Fast, Cheap, and Out of Control by this filmmaker, Errol Morris. He did like Fog of War and all these other amazing documentaries. And Fast, Cheap, and Out of Control kind of combines these four characters that seem disparate and disconnected. So we were like, maybe that model could work for this, and we just started kind of following the thread, and ultimately it worked out. But there was definitely, I mean, I have like 500 voice memos where I was like in the edit. It took me like 9 months to edit the film or something, like every day, and there was a lot of like times where I was really like, this is a failure. What am I gonna do? Like I can hear in the voice memos that I'm like getting lost in the edit, and it became so complex. I remember the part where I thought like I've really gone insane. It's like, I started filming myself cutting the film, and that started sort of ending up in the film, and I was like, no, what's happening? So ultimately I kind of dialed it back a little bit, and it worked out. But if you watch the film, you can see parts of the edit timeline actually are in the film. Like no one knows what it is, but that's what it is, and that's left over from that part of the kind of rabbit hole that you have to go down in the edit room with documentaries to figure out what story you're telling.
You always talk about in class taking ideas from your real life or stuff that you see, and you said that gentleman kind of gave you that idea. As you tell stories in class, I always wonder, have you ever tried doing stand-up comedy? Has it ever been something you want to do? 'Cause you kill me sometimes.
I have a whole like routine that I'm just waiting to unleash on Denver.
Yeah.
So yeah,
We'll go to open mics.
We got a guy we can set you up with.
I haven't done, because I'm sort of like fearful of the process. So I have all these recordings of my stand-up routines that might be terrible failures. So I've thought like what I should do is like make these like animated films with like this weird. I have this idea about this weird cat character named Helmet who's like this. It's a long story, but anyways, the whole point is this delivery device for stand-up routines. It's like Helmet kind of going through his life and like talking about things, and so I think maybe that's one way to overcome the stage fright, or I should just suck it up and like go do it and see what happens.
There's lots of open mics here in the
city. Yeah, I know. So.
I think you got it all day. You kill me, and when I hear you describe things and stuff, I'm like, he's a comic.
Well, I appreciate that because I feel like that it's a form of writing, obviously. The same thing that I think some of the same insights and like sensitivity that motivates people to be comedians also motivates them to be writers and visual storytellers and stuff. It's that like sensitivity of the world you're living in, and also maybe like some profound horror about the world you're living in, like translates into comedy. Comedy, I feel like, is rooted in some deep kind of disturbed fear or depression about things or something. So
this is the guy to make Brandt's movie right here.
Yeah.
All right.
We have we had a guest on who's a pretty well-known stand-up comic here that lives here in Denver, and his memoir, he put his memoir out in 2017, and the memoir the inspiration to write the memoir was given to him by Brad Garrett, the guy from Everybody Loves Raymond.
Okay.
But yeah, he's been trying to like.
That's cool. Like he wants to make a film version of the memoir or something?
Originally Brad Garrett was like, this is a movie or this is a book, this is something here. I don't really know what I can do to help you. I'm a very busy guy. And then so he turned it into a book, but then he mentioned that someone had reached out to him if the rights were available to turn it into a movie.
That's cool. Yeah, I'd like to hear more about that sometime.
He his dad stole $80,000 from him.
Oh,
and
no.
so then his plan was to poison his dad with Jamba Juice.
If you're going to poison somebody with something, Jamba Juice is a good choice. You might even have to alter it.
Well, that's what he found out that his dad was allergic to penicillin.
Oh, my God.
So the plan was they put the penicillin in the Jamba Juice, gave the dad the Jamba Juice, but the dad didn't want to drink the Jamba Juice. So.
Isn't that always the way with poisonings?
Right?
No, you have it. You drink some.
So when he came into studio, we had a mango Jamba Juice sitting there for him.
Did he push it, just slowly push it
he
away?
chugged that thing
down.
Yeah. And then it'd be great if you just had poisoned him and been like, the end.
Dose him.
Then the dad paid you like $20,000 to do it as a revenge killing.
So talking on comedy, and I'm not sure, I know you talked about it in class before. Did you work on Eastbound and Down, or did you work with someone who produced that show or worked on that show?
So the editor of that show, Jeff Siebenek, one of the editors of that show, edited the trailer for my first film, Confederate Goliath. And also, well, that's actually wasn't my first film. My first film was like the worst film ever made in history, this film called Rootbound. I was like a landscaper and installed irrigation for a long time. And me and that guy, Seth Grossman, this is kind of a funny story. Let's see if I can truncate it somehow. So when Seth, my buddy, I guess I shouldn't have said his whole name, but when Seth, my
We can
buddy,
edit it out.
was like, we should be filmmakers, the first thing we did was we wrote this feature script called Rootbound, and it was really terrible. It was like a comedy about like this landscaper who is also like this taxidermy artist, and on and on and on. It was kind of ridiculous. But we had gone to school with this guy, Tyler Brody, who was lived up in New York in like this giant brownstone, and he was the one of the producers on Darren Aronofsky's film Pi. I don't know if anyone's... Have you seen Pi? You should see it. I feel like you would like it.
Pi?
Yeah. It's about this like crazed mathematical genius. And it was like a super underground film and like this big hit and kind of like launched their careers and stuff. So we were like, we're going to go up to Tyler Brody and we're going to like give him this script and then we're going to be rich. And so we made this short film version of it, like on VHS tape. And I feel like the moment you know your film is a total piece of shit is when you think to yourself, what if I turn it black and white? Would that make it better? Like, would that fix it somehow? And I remember thinking that. So we go up there and we have this like our terrible feature script and we have like the VHS tape. And he invites us in, and he's got like this full movie screen that like he like pushes a button and it comes like all the way down from the ceiling. It's like this giant, and he was like, "So you got the short film?" And I just remember being like, it's like in my sad little briefcase, and I was like, "Nope, no, we just have the script." I was like, "We can't show this on this giant screen; it's just gonna ruin it." And so, to make a long story short, he was of course like didn't fund or back our film at all because it sucked, and who would? But then years and years and years later, with Reconvergence, he was like, "Now you finally have a film that I think is cool." We showed him the rough cut, and his brother like came in as a producing partner on that. So it took like 10 years, but we finally won him over.
Nice.
So.
That's awesome. What was I going to say? Oh, I have one more question. I don't know what he's got, but for the people, for our fans, 3 films that everyone should check out, in your opinion.
Apocalypse Now. Gotta check out Apocalypse Now if you haven't. Is it called This Is England? Have you seen This Is England? It's about this like little skinhead kid in like the 80s who like sort of falls in accidentally with like his like this guy that just got out of jail who's like a Nazi and kind of gets led down this dark road. I think that's an incredible film. And then, gosh, if I have to pick one more, I think The Fog of War is one.
You can do 5 if you
want.
want.
Yeah, so The Fog of War, I think that's an amazing film. I feel like Werner Herzog's Aguirre, The Wrath of God. Speaking of South America, like if you like South America, it's about this crazed conquistador looking for El Dorado who goes mad in the Peruvian rainforest. And then maybe Fellini's 8.5. Have you ever seen any Fellini films? Super crazy film, but kind of amazing. I could go on and on, but I would say those are some of my favorite films for radically different reasons.
All right.
Oh, wait, sorry. Tender Mercies, too.
Tender
Mercies, Robert Duvall film set in Texas.
So my final question is a 2-parter. New to UC Denver, this is your first semester here. What are your goals as a professor at UC Denver, and what do you hope to accomplish here? And do you have any projects that you're working on right now?
It's funny that you say that because I just before was writing down on a giant legal pad, as I have the habit to do, what are my goals right now? And so, one of my goals is always to continue to be productive as a filmmaker, because I really feel like you can't have legitimacy in the classroom if you're not actively doing what it is that you're teaching. So figuring out a way to, write and make films that are engaging and that continue kind of the development of my body of work. At this point, I've been doing this a while. I have a kind of a stable of films that I've made, and I really want to keep doing that in earnest and in a way that keeps elevating my ability as a filmmaker for the long haul. And I also want to make sure that, like I just got here, and uprooting your life and moving across the country with your family and like your 5-year-old is like a exhausting experience. But, I want to continue developing and kind of tweaking my courses so that they can help prepare the filmmakers that we have in our program to have their own unique voices and comment on the world in some way that's meaningful to them. I always say that like the 2 things I want for students is for them to broker their degrees into, creative fulfillment and some form of financial security. So I hope that my courses can play some small role in that in relationship to all the other courses in the curriculum. And there's some really amazing instructors here. And I think this is a really good program. And then what was the other question? If I'm working on something else right now? So the Cheech film is playing right now, and we're kind of going around in different places with that. But I also have this like migrant deaths film, short film that's about all these people that are dying around these 2 checkpoints in Texas. And I filmed it for a long time, but I feel like I'm just now in the place where I can kind of confront the footage and work on it. So I'm hoping to have that done by the end of like December. It could be a much bigger film, but I'm hoping I can contain it to like a 17-minute film. So we shot with like the Border Patrol and Operation Identification, which is like this group this nonprofit group is trying to like exhume all these bodies and identify all these people that they're finding out in the brush and stuff down there. And then I have a bunch of other stuff kind of on the table after that, but I just want to concentrate on getting that film done and also this short story that I just finished writing. I want to try to get that published. So those are my kind of near-term goals.
I lied. I also have one more.
Okay.
Question we ask everyone. Do you have a daily routine that you kind of use to up your game or just keep yourself with a level head?
Well, I had one, but it's kind of all imploded since I moved here. And that's one thing that I'm trying to like wrap my head around is like, how does, this is such a radically different experience. When I was in Texas, like we had bought a house and like I just got in my little car and drove 12 miles down the road, and like my schedule was set always semester to semester. So it was real easy to say like, okay, so this chunk is when I work on films and this chunk is when I'm in classes. But now that's all upended, it's like my schedule is weird. I have all like 8 o'clock classes. I'm taking the train in and like, it's all, I'm still like trying to figure out how to do that. But let me at least say this, that like to me as a filmmaker, like those set routines are really, really important actually. Like I don't do that great in an environment where things are constantly changing. Oddly enough, when I'm on production, like things can be volatile and crazy, but it's still like this sort of controlled chaos. Yeah. And so one of the things I'm looking forward to like next semester, hopefully, is like starting to get those elements in place where I can like, start exercising again and like working on films at a particular time for X amount of hours a day and all that good stuff. So I think if you're a filmmaker or any sort of artist, that daily discipline is a really important thing.
Yeah, otherwise the muse will get you.
Yeah, right. Because it's a fine line between being like creatively successful and becoming like a self-destructive nightmare.
100%. Yeah. Couldn't agree with you more. Edward, anything on social media? Where can people find you? Find your films? Do you have a landing page, or is there?
I don't. I should have that. Most of my films show up, I think, on like IMDb, and you can, a lot of them are shorts, but the features are available through streaming. You go to IMDb and look them up, and then you should be able to figure out like how to watch them.
Is there one for the Cheech film or?
No, not right now. But there's 2 versions of that film. There's an 11-minute version, a 25-minute version, and my hope. The 11-minute version is the one that's playing all over the place at festivals. But my hope is that the longer version can be on television at some point. So that's something we're working on now. And then, of course, it'll be available on the internet as well. But right now we're kind of holding out to see if maybe some, multi-state PBS thing can happen with it or something. And that kind of depends on what Cheech wants to do with it, too. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I really appreciate you coming. It was awesome to meet you and get to chat with you and talk about all kinds of stuff. I learned some things here. I got some things to research now. So
yeah, it was a great experience.
Appreciate you for your time.
As someone who interviews people a lot, like this was a really fun interview to take part in, and I can't wait. I got to go listen to all your podcasts, I guess.
Sweet.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Have a great day.
Thanks.